Good evening and welcome to episode 32 of Screentone Club, your fortnightly look at manga with a focus on joint discussion. My name is Elliot Page. We are recording on the 1st of September 2019. Oh god, we're into literal autumn now, actual autumn, and this will hopefully become for release on the 3rd of September. I'm joined, as always, by my lovely co-host, Mr. Andy Hanley. How you doing, Andy?
I'm employing a new strategy of just pretending it's not September, so everything that you said was untrue. It is not September at all. Everything is great.
I love being August the 32nd.
Yes, yeah, our new calendar.
Yeah, dear me. So, as mentioned, and this is our fortnightly look at manga. Today is accidentally our One Piece books episode, but also with some returning champions. But first, a discussion about a quick shout out about our Patreon. We have a Patreon. We just put up a bonus episode on Gleipnir. I hope I never have to pronounce that word again. But we have a bonus episode about that, and you too can get bonus episodes and even vote on what we cover in the bonus episodes by pledging from just $1 a month to the podcast. And worth noting, we're getting quite close to our next sort of landmark on the Patreon, and if we get to $100 a month of Patreon sort of pledges, we will start doing 2 bonus episodes a month, so you can literally double your content quite easily if you bully your friends. Well, if you encourage your friends to help us out. And as always, a quick shout out to Rob Jessup, who very kindly supports the podcast at an almost silly rate, but again, greatly appreciated. So, moving on. Also, as a quick note for the Patreon, actually, before I move on, voting will open for September for the bonus episode. We have quite a good, gaggle of series already ready to be voted for. But of course, you can vote for anything you like, as long as it's available in English and in the UK. So, if you fancy making us, watch something you feel is criminally underrated, then hey, you can do that. So, anyway, returning champions. I'm going to continue gabbing for a wee sec, but first and foremost, returning champions, the easy bit. I got Saint Young Men Volume 2, which came out about a month ago, I believe. And Andy, I think we were both quite positive about Saint Young Men Volume 1 when we reviewed it on a previous episode of the podcast, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, I enjoyed it greatly.
Great. So you'll probably enjoy Saint Young Men Volume 2 then. That's kind of it. I don't really have anything too much more to say. Jesus gets up to some hella moe stuff in volume 2, if that phrase is allowed to exist. You get some even deeper cuts in lore. Well, not lore, theology. God, calling it lore like it's friggin' Mass Effect or something. But you get the idea. There's some quite deep cuts. You even get to see Buddha trying to, bribe someone by saying, "Hey, I'm Buddha," and it doesn't work. But yeah, you get quite a lot of good Goonie stuff going on. If you liked Volume 1, then yeah, Volume 2, very good. Continues to be very fun.
Yeah, I'd totally forgotten to pick that up, so that is a handy reminder that I should do so. I should ask quickly, can you give it a t-shirt game score out of 10?
High. Actually very high. There's a very good t-shirt related gag that I'm not going to mention at all, because when it happened, I was kind of just rolling around laughing at it. So there's a very good t-shirt gag in this volume.
Okay, I look forward to it even more then.
Yeah, the one thing that is slightly annoying about this series is that it's almost like full price of a physical volume for the digital copy. But honestly, Saint Young Men is very good, and it feels like a blessing that we even have it available in English. So I'm kind of happy to pay that for this series. Slightly begrudgingly, but still.
Yeah, I'm willing to take that after, as discussed previously, so many years where it seemed like that was never going to get any kind of English release, and it was on the never happen list. I'll take throwing a few extra quid at it just to be able to read it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a very nice release, so there we are. And my other returning champion is one we talked about previously, is Until Your Bones Rot. So, in the back, I've been reading the remaining volumes, because we did volume 1 on the podcast, and I read through volume 2 to the end, which is volume 7, and man alive, this series, just trips over itself completely. It there's several things I want to cover in like, I don't want to obviously spoil the mystery because that would like make the entire series worthless to a lot of people who are listening. But I can summarize my complaints about this series is basically the characters like continue to be moderately unlikable and then start to become extremely unlikable, mostly because they like, there's a lot of cases where characters could like get out of dodge and, you know, kind of come off okay, but then really don't. And they also seem like almost determined to pick like the most difficult path, which complicates things further. Something happens at the end of volume 2, which is extremely kind of intense and very much a case of, oh man, like this series is kind of going for it. If you're doing this, like I didn't think this would happen. But then something does happen. And then it goes through quite a lot more setup. You know, you've got a lot of interesting, sort of, you know, preparation. And then the whole thing kind of just falls apart towards the end. It does feel almost like the series had to make some kind of resolution and then really had to struggle to put everything together at the end. The last volume, volume 7, is almost the entire thing is just resolving everything kind of one thing at a time, just grabbing stuff and putting it together. And like the eventual answer to it makes sense, but is still vaguely unsatisfying, and it feels like it missed its stop almost, where it could have made a much more, like, it even needed to be like 2 volumes shorter or a volume longer to justify everything that kind of comes out at the end of it. And so it's kind of disappointing, honestly. And like, it goes deep into some love polygon stuff, which really derails some parts of the murder mystery. And that while an interesting, like, character study, is just not that interesting when merged with everything else. And you have one character in particular, Ryu, who basically does nothing for the entire series, but be resentful, in the side of a panel. And that's kind of all he ever gets to do, which is a shame. And yeah, it ends up okay, but it's very much a case of like both misplaying its hand and also not really having enough to work with in a weird combo. So kind of disappointing, honestly, from, you know, the whole hog, really. So kind of can't really recommend it, if that makes sense, because, you know, especially from volume 5 onwards, I was going, okay, like something kind of needs to be resolved here because this is kind of just rumbling on. But yeah, so there's Until Your Bones Rot. Kind of just like slowly lumbers itself to a conclusion, I suppose, is one way of putting it.
Yeah, that kind of seems like a shame because, you know, for all the kind of the problems and kind of issues we had with that first volume, like there's very definitely like the kernel of a good series there, and it kind of felt like, if nothing else, it might be a series that kind of lives and dies by its ending. But if even that is disappointing, then that's definitely a bit of a blot to its copybook.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because, like, if I was to write out the steps of what happened, of the actual ending and how it ends up, it's good. Like, the ending actually ends in a pretty, like, the actual ending of it is good. You know, it has a pretty interesting little ending and, like, look at the characters. But the problem is that just the steps of how it gets there, but also the steps of how it reveals itself to you just don't satisfy at all. Some of the bigger mysteries end up becoming massive wet farts, which doesn't help. And a lot of it comes down to a lot of weird, stupid motives and a lot of cases of sitting there staring at it going, why? Why would any of this happen? Like, this doesn't make sense. And it complicates itself multiple times. And also there's quite a lot of stuff where, like, I went back through the first 2 volumes again, and basically it's not doing a retcon, but it's doing flashbacks that then backfill stuff that you could never have known. So the one thing that makes it highly unsatisfying as a mystery or a thriller is there's no way you could ever, like, guess or, like, even investigate towards the eventual conclusion on your own. Like, you can't do it because you just don't have the information, which does make it quite annoying when it's like, oh, this is a big flashback that really changes a bunch of characters and motivations, and why wasn't this talked about before in any form or fashion? So that's what kind of makes the ending unsatisfying, honestly, partly, is that there's no way you can even guess at what's coming. So you don't get the excitement of, ooh, is it this? Ooh. So you just don't get it.
Yeah, that does sound deeply frustrating. Like, I mean, because it's one thing to feel stupid for having not figured something out, but there's a big difference between feeling stupid because, you just missed something, or like the series is smartly written enough, excuse me, the series is smartly written enough that, it's managed to kind of obfuscate things and kind of be sneaky about it. But when it's just straight up kind of, redacted important things, and that's like, aha, look at my solution. That just feels like a cop out in this kind of series.
Yeah, it really does, especially when I was reading it going, oh, when did they discuss this before? And they didn't. And I was like, oh, well, that sucks. Like, how was I supposed to... It also means that some of the character turns just aren't satisfying, because like there is some good moments the way you're like, oh, this happened, but no way would you ever have known. So anyway, it's, a shame. Like, also, like, it can't quite get over the fact that it's extremely male gazy and like boobs and butt get grabbed ahoy, which kind of makes it a bit more disappointing, honestly. But yeah, that's Until Your Bones Are Hot. So moving on, I've been talking too much, frankly. Do you want to take the lead on our topics for this episode, Andy? I feel like I do this to you a lot. You must be used to it by now. You can say no, but
no, let's do this.
Cool.
So my pick for this episode is I Hear the Sunspot, which is a 2-volume series, so nice and short. There is also a 2-volume kind of follow-on if you really get into it. As mentioned, it is published by One Piece Books. The author is Yuki Fumino, and you can find it on Kobo and Bookwalker as per kind of all of One Piece's stuff. I Hear the Sunspot is the story of 2 young men, effectively. It's kind of told mostly through the lens of a guy called Taichi Sagawa, who is... he's not really a loudmouth. He's just kind of, he's very forthright and kind of isn't afraid to say whatever's on his mind.
He's very Genki, I suppose.
Yeah, like he definitely has that kind of energy to him as well. But as we join him, he's kind of job hunting because he's just been fired from his previous job for arguing with a customer. Rather stupidly, he's like basically trying out like the neighboring businesses who are like, no, I heard you having an argument with a customer. Like your voice carries, which is kind of a key plot point as it turns out. And with that not really going very well, he's kind of wandering around, and he kind of literally drops in on our other main character, Kohei Sugihara, who is just kind of like hanging out on a rooftop having his lunch. And if there's one thing that will turn Taichi's eye, it's some good food. And he very much lives by the credence that if somebody gives you free food, then they must be a decent guy. And so Sugihara instantly gets into his good books by offering him his lunch. And Sugihara initially seems to be very kind of taciturn, not really interested in having a conversation, is very reserved. But the other key part of the story, as it turns out, is that Sugihara has a hearing disability. So he's not completely deaf. He can hear people, but he finds it very difficult, especially, in busy places, etc. And, so, that's kind of why he is isolated the way that he is. And that kind of becomes a key part of the series. But as it happens, Sugihara is also looking for a note taker. He's basically a freshman in law school. And because of his hearing disability, he's kind of looking for somebody to help out in lessons and take notes on what the lecturers are saying, because, he can't necessarily make it all out. And so Taichi kind of just like leaps in and says, hey, I'll do that job, especially when he finds out he's going to be paid in free lunches. And so the two of them kind of end up hanging out and spending a fair bit of time together. And it's really kind of something of a story of Taichi sort of trying to pull Sugihara somewhat out of his shell. Also ends up kind of sticking up for him against the kind of prejudices that he comes across. And as time goes on, kind of, their relationship waxes and wanes somewhat, but they end up getting closer, and ultimately, this is a boys' love series, so by the end of the first volume, we've had a confession, etc., as well. Although, as the afterwards to this volume kind of notes, like, from the author, it's like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot that I was writing this for a boys' love manga magazine, and at some point they basically called me up and said, like, are they gonna, like, go out or anything, because this doesn't seem to be happening. So it does almost feel a little bit like a afterthought in some senses. Like this could easily not be a boys love title at all. Like it's been very light on that stuff in this first volume, and kind of like the friendship angle would have been just as strong in terms of kind of, you know, the characters, etc.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, carry on.
And for the most part, I like this volume. Like it has some caveats. Like I think the biggest problem that it has is, you know, it kind of, one of the best things that this volume does is we get a chapter or so that is very much kind of Sugihara's point of view, kind of going back to when his kind of hearing disability first manifested. Like, he's not had it since birth. It's something that kind of came about via illness. And that's actually like probably the most powerful kind of like high point of the volume in terms of kind of showing, you know, what happened, and obviously kind of the fallout from that in terms of, you know, suddenly losing this ability that, you know, you kind of take for granted, and what that meant to his relationships with kind of friends, how people perceived him, and kind of like how people perceived the change in him. And, you know, that's some really good stuff there. I think my biggest issue with this volume is that it could almost have gone back a bit further to show a bit more of kind of what he was like before that. Like, you get a very kind of brief glimpse of kind of the boy he was, until kind of, you know, this illness kind of like caused him the issues that he had. But like, it's the thing that this volume keeps harping back to is the idea that, you know, Sugihara is kind of, you know, isolating himself in part, and also like partly just finding himself isolated from society because it's a society that isn't really geared up for people with hearing disabilities. And he's been kind of stubborn about it on his own part. Like, he's refused to kind of learn sign language, which again kind of plays into a few parts of this volume. Like, he could have gone to you know, a college that suited his needs better, but like, he was very determined to just go to a normal college. And so kind of all of that plays into that. But like, it's hard to get a real feel for what the character was like before, and that kind of makes it hard to really like him at the end of the day. Like, you get some little glimpses of that kind of make him more than sort of a bit of a flat character. But like, I don't know how you found it, Elliot, but like, I did find it hard to really get behind Sugihara's character, because I feel like I always felt like there was a layer to him missing that like nobody, including the reader, gets to see.
I think so I quite like Sugihara, honestly, especially because it's a lot of, you know, having to, much like Taichi has to, although Taichi, you know, is plot bound and also very good at dragging stuff out of people because he's so guileless. Like, the guy is so friggin' like naive and guileless that he gets himself in trouble, usually because he's trying to do something good by someone. And that's one of the reasons why the two of them kind of fall in together, even though Taichi kind of falls down on the whole note-taking aspect. It's that, you know, he doesn't have, like, there's no excuses needed around him, even though at times it would help if both of them would open up a little more. But I quite like Sugihara. The main thing with me is, as you mentioned, like, there's both the question of what he was like beforehand, which I'm not so big on. The bigger thing that I find an issue is that it's very difficult to get a handle on his perception of the world. Like, he talks to Taiji and talks to others about how he experiences the world. But the one thing I think would be really helpful as a reader is to, like, you know, you have the flashbacks from his point of view, but it would be a lot more useful, or I would personally like it, if there was a section that was from his point of view entirely, including his sensory reception. Like, how does he hear people? Like, you know, there's a section when, after he's just become hard of hearing, that it kind of partially has that, but not very clearly. Like, I would like, as I say, that I'd like the section where it shows what he's having to deal with and how he perceives the world. And like, he mentions that Taichi is different, mostly because Taichi's a loudmouth, but also projects well with his voice, and also does something that a lot of people don't do to Sugihara and will constantly forget, which is actually talk to his face and talk directly to him so he can lip read and he can hear them. Whereas, you know, a lot of the social issues that arise for Sugihara is because people are just talking offhandedly, like sat on their chair sideways, and he can't hear well because both they're projecting their voice away from him and they're also facing away. So how the hell is he going to be able to hear them, like, or see what they're saying? So, yeah. And also I feel like, because he starts out as being so withdrawn and like his basic facial expression is like a colon with a pipe. Like his face never barely changes. So when they do manage to coax emotion out of him, it really is powerful in this series. And I kind of grew to like him as a result. It is funny you mentioned the BL thing, the BL magazine thing, and I'm gonna sound like such a friggin' like dumbass like dude here, but like I feel like I would have liked this without the encroaching BL, mostly not because I'm against BL, like I'm perfectly fine, but it's more the fact that because, as you mentioned, the author themselves completely forgot about it, that they were perfectly fine with their direction of travel of like the characters, and even the confession element is really well handled, even if the characters themselves completely flub how to handle it and what a deal it is. But when they have a snog at one point, and my first note in that, you're like, is this the time to be doing that? Like, I think the two of you are still in the middle of an argument here. Like, this just seems a bit weird, just to sort of shove a kiss in there. Like you could have done that 2 pages later and it would have fitted a lot better with what the characters were talking about rather than just snog. Wait, we're arguing? Okay, back to that. It's like, what's going on here?
I mean, that whole point in particular felt like it could have been like the chapter ran its course and there was just like an asterisk at the bottom of the page, like, by the way, they're also in love, because it's like it just suddenly felt it was almost like a translation note or something of just like, by the way, like I should just also make this clear, because otherwise it didn't really fit into the kind of the scenario at hand.
It almost felt like it was a page out of like I say, a misprint almost, because I'm like, wait, why is it doing this now? Like that doesn't flow at all. And also frankly, like even before the confession, it's like, oh, these two are totally like, they don't have to be a relationship to have, they don't have to be going out, quote unquote, to have a relationship that's meaningful. They're clearly highly codependent and suit each other well. And that's what kind of makes them an interesting pair and why I warm to them so much. I kind of came to enjoy Taichi as the loudmouth, not an idiot, but, he's just a loudmouth, very excitable dude. And it really helped that, he was also someone to fight Sugihara's corner, and I came to like them both because of that. But when it's having to, like, I don't know, like when it's having to, like, put its BL bona fides out there, it makes it seem lamer as a result. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. But I liked them before it, as I say, the confession was fine because it was a case of like, oh, don't know what to do in this situation. I'm going to throw my emotions out there and hope nothing goes wrong. And then when they have a kiss later, it's like, well, that's fine and cool, but you totally don't need to do that. And if anything, it makes their relationship slightly more boring because it doesn't feel quite as heartfelt and like conjoined. Like it doesn't make it makes it feel a lot more formulaic all of a sudden. Maybe it's just me.
Yeah. And I mean, weirdly, I think for me, it also kind of, and apologies, this is going to be another one of those like series I keep bringing up in subsequent podcasts, but like it also made me think back to kind of Blue Flag that we covered recently that, has like, characters who are in love with other characters of the same sex, and like it really works with that, and it really does stuff with it over a long period of time to kind of like it takes a lot of care in kind of putting the building blocks of that kind of love, as one-sided and unrequited as it is, like it really puts a lot of care into building that up slowly and kind of letting you see it kind of ferment, and you from its formative kind of moments right the way through to effectively a confession. Whereas this, it did feel, and kind of, it all really clicked into place when I kind of read that kind of little afterward / comic that was just like, oh yeah, like that did feel very just thrown in at the end of just like, oh yeah, I guess I need to put in the thing that makes this kind of, that defines this against the genre that I'm actually supposed to be writing for, rather than kind of a natural, just a natural end points to the way things have been building. Yeah,
I feel like it's a massive shame, honestly, because I quite enjoyed this series quite a lot, or this volume even, sorry. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why I kind of want to ding it, like, the back forth, like pacing of it, how it mishandles some weird like plot elements, like the whole Miho thing, which is very confusing from the get-go and handled weirdly. And also like the characters finding the exact wrong time to clam up and not talk to each other, which until recently, is generally their best strength, is talking to each other. And then when they decide to clam up is usually the worst possible time. So, I mean, I get it. You got to spin drama out somehow, but it makes it kind of annoying. And then, the weird, like, falling out they have towards the end of the volume, which also is very, like, slightly confusing in terms of, wait, why are they upset? Why are they not talk? Oh, I don't know. But then, it kind of comes to the good. But I really enjoyed the characters. Like, I like Tai Chi a great deal, just because of his effervescence, I suppose, his effervescent personality. But it was kind of nice, but at the same time, it's a case of like, it would be nice if there was a few things like just sort of trimmed up. The one thing that made me laugh, honestly, is like after the first chapter or two, I was thinking to myself, I said, well, this all works fine. If anything, it kind of like if you just swapped the characters out for girls, it would be like every other, like the character archetypes and the relationship archetypes and how they come to meet. You could basically copy and paste it and it'd work perfectly fine the other way around as well, which I think just shows that I've read a lot of like very sort of formulaic Yuri or just romance manga. Although I will admit, like the way they meet each other is funny, and then when they have to replicate it, Taichi has to replicate it because he doesn't know how else to get there, which is funny.
Yeah, it has some good moments like that. But yeah, I mean, I warmed somewhat to Sugihara's character by the end. Like, he does start to kind of show a little bit, show more of his cards, I guess, as this first volume goes on. Like, yeah, Taichi's kind of hard not to like because he is kind of in that typical sort of character archetype. But I did also like the way this first volume kind of deals with the issues that Sugihara has around his disability, because it would. Again, like I suspect we've all read kind of other series that kind of take subject matter like this and just turn it into like, oh, look at all these people who suck because like they bully the character that has a disability. But like this has a far broader kind of brush that it uses to kind of like, paint the social issues of kind of, of having to live with a disability like this. Yes, there are people who are just kind of like jerks about it, but there are also people on the other end of the spectrum who are just trying so hard to be helpful that they're actually being hurtful in their own way without realizing it, or they're just kind of, it effectively kind of as per kind of like Miho in that whole kind of story arc of just kind of having their own kind of weird fantasy almost of like, oh, well, I like him, so it'll be great. I'll be like the person that helps them. Which is like a weirdly backwards way of kind of looking at a relationship. And I liked the way that it handled all of that stuff. Like, I think it did a good job of kind of putting together the full picture of kind of why Sugihara has kind of isolated himself the way he has, and that it isn't just a case of like, oh, everybody bullied him, so, he's kind of gone off to do his own thing. Like, there's far more complexity to it than that, and I think all of that was handled pretty well here. Yeah,
Miho filling in the role of, like, Philip K. Dick ruining his entire life, and also the life of the person he's trying to help. That's a bit of a weird cut, but yeah. But, I mean, it also, like, one of the first notes I made was about the note-taking, like, quote-unquote job/volunteer thing, where... like, my first response to that, like, being the, like, overly politicized person I am was, well, that's a stupid band-aid that shouldn't need to exist, and there should be a better provision for people. like, I know that's, like, that's my sort of weirdo over politics take, but it definitely did feel like, well, this is a solution, but it's not a very good solution, and also, like, it's not helping the person on their own to, like, continue on their own. So yeah, it was this weird, it was also a very good, like, sort of indictment of the social structures that had come to, like, entrap Sugihara. Like, there's one offhanded comment made by someone who is there and is employed to help them, basically saying, oh yeah, those who have bigger disabilities get priority, you kind of just get pushed down the list. Also you need to do this yourself and this yourself and this yourself, and bye. And it was pretty grim on that side, just because it's a case of like, yep, you ain't going to get much help, boyo. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's actually one thing it could perhaps have been a little clearer with, because like there are also points in this volume where it's suggested that Sugihara has kind of turned down a lot of the help that would have been available to him. But then, yeah, like it does also play it and kind of offset it against moments like that suggest like, no, this is just what you get because you're quote unquote not disabled enough. So it's perhaps a little kind of uneven in terms of how it treats that, because at times it makes it feel like this is kind of Sugihara being stubborn and just kind of like refusing all of the things available to him because he wants to live an entirely normal life. But at the same time, yeah, like there is also that element of like this seems like you're kind of having to work around a system that isn't helping you, and it doesn't really kind of lean entirely in one direction or another.
Yeah, it kind of makes it confusing from a reader point of view, as you mentioned, for knowing where the character stops and the system ends, because like at the start when he's diagnosed and he's like, oh, we will need you to register, if you register as disabled, you can get assistance. And that's left as an open question. So I don't know still if he actually registers disabled or if he is like just getting unofficial help on the side, like because he didn't want to register. But I guess he did. That's the thing, it's difficult to know because it does colour the perception of the character's actions and how they, developed. But it's hard to get a handle on it because you just don't know, which is a problem. So it just makes, it adds ambiguity to the character where you kind of need the clarity to have an emotional attachment to them, which I kind of do because I warmed to them, the characters, but it's difficult to see the boundaries of, you get it. I mean, obviously it's a lot easier to show with Taiji because the boundaries of, the problems he's experiencing are a lot more clearly defined. It's like, oh, family strife, etc., poverty, etc. So that is a lot easier to kind of grapple with and see, oh, okay, this is how things have got crumbled for him and why he's in this weird job hunty thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, also, like, for, like, artwork-wise, there wasn't anything kind of too much that stood out for me, but I did like that there's some really good kind of, like, transitions between panels in one or two places. Like, there's a good moment where kind of Taichi ends up kind of standing up to a guy who's kind of being a bit of a jerk towards Sugihara. Like, it's after Sugihara, again, it's playing with that whole idea that, unless Sugihara is looking at somebody directly, he can't really hear what they're saying or lip read them. And so it's somebody kind of making an aside after he's turned away. And there's some really smart kind of like paneling that shows both kind of Sugihara's point of view, where he's basically just looking at his feet, and then Taichi just going and kind of laying the dude out for being a jerk. And it kind of does a really nice kind of like side by side of just kind of playing the two things alongside one another that look pretty cool. And then there's another moment where there's kind of like one of the more kind of dramatic high points of the volume that is sort of taking place in the rain, because dramatic things always happen in the rain.
Under a bridge, very important.
Yeah, also under a bridge. But like, there's a really nice kind of transition that has like kind of rain/teardrop stains that just kind of like colour that transition. That again, like it's really effective at kind of giving a sense of place and emotion, and it also just looks kind of cool. So there are like a couple of moments there that really stood out. Like, oh, there's some real craft and thought being put into kind of, some of the paneling and transitions here.
Yeah, there's also some good use of height or height differential, because Sugihara is already like real tall and Taichi is not. And so it plays with that quite a bit, where you got the characters like almost Taichi's like peeking up from the bottom of the panel trying to stay in shot. There's some good expressions, like, as mentioned, Sugihara is quite taciturn. And so when you do get something out of him, it feels special. There's some good blushing. It's important. Blushing is important. But yeah, it was a good, I don't know. One thing I want to ask, Andy, is do you think you're going to read volume 2?
Yeah, I am quite tempted. Like, I do kind of want to see where it goes from here. I mean, especially given, what we've mentioned about the kind of the boys' love origins almost being forgotten. Like, it feels like everything is set up for the second volume to be far more relationship focused. And I'm actually quite interested to see how the series deals with that, assuming that it does kind of, go more seriously down that route. And yeah, given that it's only a 2-volume thing, kind of a sequel notwithstanding, yeah, I may well pick it up and check it out at some point, because like there was definitely enough for me to be like, yeah, I want to see where these characters end up, if nothing else.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, I'm afraid I'm going to let you take the dive on that, and we'll wait to hear from you.
That's fair enough. One other thing we should say about the artwork: good meatballs.
Very good meatballs. Good food. Good food. In fact, actually, quick note. One thing that's kind of wild about this manga, I feel like this is a common thing. Well, not a common thing, but something that I always think about whenever I get a BL manga. But basically, like, most of the women in this series are really kind of just unsympathetic, apart from you got like the Gaudy girls who keep reappearing several times, and then Miho is just like generic, like K-On! Character number 3. Meanwhile, you've got Sugihara's mum, who is cool and good. So she's cool. Also, they have this sort of palatial house, which looks kind of ridiculous. So, yeah. Actually, like, I should have mentioned, like, Sugihara's mum is great. And it, again, like, I feel like this kind of series, you get so used to kind of the typical kind of stock mum figure in these characters that's either like super resentful of son's disability and kind of like either overtly or secretly hates it, or you have the like super supportive to a ridiculous degree mum who's maybe overbearing. And like Sugihara's mum in this series is kind of exactly what you'd want a mum to be in that scenario, in that like she is as supportive as she needs to be, but she's also quite clearly quite willing to like give him a kick up the ass if he needs it. And like there's a really good kind of, she felt like an actual parent and not just like a stereotype of kind of manga parent number 3. Like and I did really like that. It felt like there was kind of a really good character in there that I kind of hope like maybe gets a little more play in the second volume if I do read it, because like she seemed great, and she seemed like an actual decent kind of well-rounded idea of a parental figure. Yeah, she was useful and very important from a storyline point of view, but also just a good emotional anchor without, like, you know, she was a well-placed human being, and also she was both a good character and a good person. So, you know, ticking both those boxes. Exactly. Yeah, cool. So, unless you want anything else to mention about this?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah, but you know, I wonder what the series didn't deliver on its title. However, it still didn't tell me what a sunspot sounds like.
Yes, yeah, like maybe this is like this will be the second volume where they go into space or something. It'll be like suddenly like, oh yeah, I forgot that I was also supposed to write about space in this series. So I don't know, they become spacemen in volume 2.
By the way, this BL manga is also, this BL magazine is also a giant robot magazine. Oh, fuck's sake. Cool. So yeah, that's I Hear the Sunspot volume 1. As a quick programming note, be very careful which volume you're buying when you're looking for it on some sites. In the there's I Hear the Sunspot, there's the sequel volume, which also has the name I Hear the Sunspot, but can be difficult to, it also gets listed as a volume 1 because it has a different subtitle. And then there's I Hear the Sunspot Limit, which is the sequel series, I believe, if I've got that right. But basically, yes, yeah. you have 3 different quote unquote series called I Hear the Sunspot, which means that you've got to be careful you're buying the right one, else you might end up completely confused and discombobulated in timeline.
Yeah. From what I saw, it seems mostly to be an issue with the way they've kind of listed the 2 volumes of the original series in Kobo, because they've not given them like a volume 1 and volume 2 moniker. And this is also not a series that has a whacking great 1 or 2 on the front cover. So like even looking at that, it's like I can't tell. I literally, to do it, I actually went into the preview for the volume and like, that looks like the start of a story. I think this is volume 1, and I guess I got it right. Yeah, but also cover art, very nice. So that's also another thing, yes, in its bonus. So cool. Moving on to Hinamatsuri, which was my pick. I haven't watched the anime. I have seen a lot of GIFs from it though, and it looks real funny. So Hinamatsuri is weird, but Hinamatsuri Volume 1 follows the travails of a Yakuza kind of punk called Nita, who likes the finer things in life. Like, he likes to surround himself with good shit, like, you know, paintings, vases, taking care of his flat, you know, having a silly punk haircut and Yakuza shirt, like you've seen from the 600 plus people you've beaten up in the various Yakuza video games, if you've played those. But he thinks himself as being quite well regarded, and, you know, he thinks himself as being quite cultured. And so he's sat having a smoke one day after work when a dimensional portal opens above his head, and this, like, weird face in a pillbug costume, like a very tight metal sleeping bag, just plops out of the middle of nowhere, whacks him on the head, and then lays on the floor.
So Nitta, looking at it, goes, man, I must have drunk too much, and goes to bed. He wakes up next morning and the pill bug is still there. So the pill bug speaks to him and says, hey, don't ignore me. Please get me out of here. There's a switch on the back. So he kicks the switch and boop, out pops a naked girl, who appears to be like middle school age. And basically, this girl is Hina. She is a very, very powerful Esper. She has psychokinetic, telekinetic powers. She is extremely sort of reserved and kind of sardonic, I suppose, and just sort of taciturn. Like, she's like a rude version of Yuki Nagato, I guess. But she is basically a very powerful Esper who is kind of a jerk. Like, she wants to be fed and clothed and doesn't really care, and she wants to go to school and doesn't mind making trouble for Nitta, like, you know, kind of grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back, smashing his pots, you know, that sort of thing. She wants what she wants, but she's willing to like give and take. She's had a bad experience with adults, and there's like mysteries and hints about a bad negative backstory somewhere in her life. Like, where the hell she came from, who knows? And the series kind of goes from there with the adventures of Nitta as he tries to like deal with the fact that now he's suddenly a babysitter to this very ungrateful psychic child, and Hina as well, kind of trying to warm up to someone when she has very little trust in human beings, especially adults, and kind of just wants to like enjoy the good things in life, like salmon roe, a lot of that, and also, you know, needs to use her powers or else they explode, as you find out later. And so the series kind of, it's a comedy. It then turns into it's a comedy, and it's not. One thing I want to say in particular is it's not like goony or random or sort of jokey, but it's extremely sort of like dry sense of humor. Like, it reminded me a lot of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in some ways, where a cornerstone of its humor is one character yelling at another, "You didn't tell me that," and the other character saying, "Oh, you never ask," and then something explodes, or someone gets really fucked up, or something stupid happens, or in one case, a junior high school student ends up tending bar for a few hours because no one thought to really figure out what to do with her. So she ends up basically getting a lot of money in tips because she finally learns how to do a Manhattan, although she is like a minor, so whoops. So it goes through, and it's weirdly heartfelt in a weird way, where it's about like sort of found family of a psychic, selfish girl and this idiot Yakuza who gets dragged into a bunch of different situations because of this idiot Esper, and, you know, his idiot co-workers in the Yakuza, like Gumi or whatever hell. And it kind of just goes from there, and it's really quite enjoyable as a result because it's funny and has its heart in the weirdly right place for being about a Yakuza and a psychic asshole. So it kind of goes from there. Like I say, like, it kind of has this very sort of enjoyable rolling tone of characters like thinking, well, this is dumb, but hey, what else am I going to do? Oh, well, let's carry on. Do. And it kind of rolls from there. And before you know it, you're kind of getting to the end of the volume and you're fully inured and used to this weird, dumb garbage that's going on. And these characters that are all basically looking at each other going, what the fuck have we gotten into? And you too also feeling that of like, man, what am I reading? But it's damn funny, so you can totally forgive it. I really, really enjoyed it as a result. I should have mentioned up top, it's drawn by Masao Otake, and again, One Piece books. It's 14 volumes in Japan, ongoing. There's 5 volumes at the moment in English. But yeah, it's really enjoyable, frankly. Like, the humor is on point. Like, it rarely misses, which is kind of the wild thing, honestly, is just how kind of endlessly sort of comedic it is, like, with all the characters and their stupid little problems. But yeah, what do you think of it, Andy? Sorry, I've completely run off on one.
Yeah, I mean, I went on a journey with this series because of this volume, because like a few chapters in, like it really wasn't working for me. Like the first 3 chapters, I got to the end of it and it kind of left me cold, and I was left thinking like, oh man, this is going to be one of those series where like everybody likes it but me, and like I just like can't find a thing to get into it.
Wait, you didn't like the hostage situation?
No, that was kind of the last chapter where I was just kind of like, you know, I was running through it. I was just hoping that something was going to kind of catch me, and like, I at least sort of appreciated what he was doing in that chapter, but it just didn't really work for me. And I was kind of sat there thinking, oh man, this is gonna kind of suck. Like, I mean, probably had I not been kind of reading it for this podcast, I might have been tempted to actually just kind of get up and turn my tablet off at that point. But it's like, hey, Matt, I'm gonna read the rest of this volume. And
man, your tablet's a pain in the rear to turn off if you have to stand up to do it. Sorry.
But then, like, from that point on, I loved it. Like, I think once those first 3 chapters do a lot of work in terms of like setting up the foundation and the relationship between Nita and Hina, and kind of like the more general kind of strokes of certainly the world that Nita kind of lives within. And I feel like once it got that out of the way and laid those foundations, like it just really took off, and like I absolutely loved the rest of the volume from that point on. Like it had me cracking up every chapter. Like it had so many great jokes. Like I suddenly found myself really kind of like warming to the characters with all of their kind of stupidity and all of the dumb things they were doing. And it kind of just turns into a really good sitcom at that point. Like, I mean, there's a whole chapter where kind of Nita and Hina like go out on the kind of like Yakuza boss's boat on a fishing trip. And it just reminded me of a lot of the classic kind of British sitcoms where, you know, the episode starts, a single relatively minor thing goes wrong, like main characters try to do a thing to fix that, make it worse or cause another problem, and you just have this chain reaction of things getting more and more ludicrously kind of out of control and more stuff going wrong until like they're absolutely kind of skin of their teeth, still like refusing to like take responsibility for any of it and actually fess up to anything that's happened, of just like, no, if we just do this one more thing, then it'll all be okay. And like, it's just this really kind of fantastic kind of piling up of like situation upon situation, all of which are kind of like just Nita kind of mostly just leaning on Hina's powers to fix it, while she's like basically passing out because she's just like had to use all of her powers.
Oh man,
and, like, moments like
as that chapter went on, I was trying to like not just tear my eyes out because like it's so intense. Like I've been in situations like that, and I've seen situations like that in comedy, and it's so keenly embarrassing. Like, just, oh god, that entire chapter is just, like, I love it, it's great, but oh my god, I just want to fucking throw the tablet on the other side of the room, 'cause it's so intense.
Yeah, and it's always like perfectly like 5 seconds from all just blowing up in their faces, but always just far enough away to be that tantalized, like, no, I think they got it this time. Oh, nope, something else has gone wrong.
Yeah, I must admit, like, this is my second read of it. Like, I read it before a month or so ago, after finally caving to the embarrassment of having had it in my tablet for like a year. And I think I'm perhaps a bit more charitable towards the first chapters because I'd already had that bedding in with the characters. So maybe that explains why I was so high on it from the get-go, because I've already read it. I mean, one thing I will admit is that it does take a while, for me at least, is that it takes those 3 or so, or even this whole first volume, to kind of bed in the art, because for the first chapter especially, and also other, like, as it slowly finds its place, like, the characters look quite, frankly, wall-eyed, and their facial structure doesn't quite match the rest of their posture and bodies. So, like, you get a lot of confusing panels where, like, Hina's proportions just look real fucked, and it's like, oh, what's going on with her? Like, what's going on with her character design? Like, is this on purpose?
Yeah, the artwork does feel kind of quite scratchy a lot of the time, is I think how I'd describe it. And yeah, like I feel like it's very much a case of when you stop noticing that, it's just because like everything else that the series is doing is kind of like taken off to the point where you don't really think about that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the weird thing about those opening chapters, because like I think they are effective at doing what they probably need to do. Like, you get a good feel for kind of Nita and his place in the Yakuza, and again, like, you get that initial look of him as like, oh, look, super successful Yakuza guy, and then you kind of like get to see the reality of it is actually, no, he's kind of like middling to actually not particularly successful, and kind of like Hina ends up being the one that sort of bails him out of things, which then in turn kind of, like you say, turns into the more heartfelt element of like, oh, like, Hina's been treated pretty badly clearly in whatever's happened in her past, and like Nita is loath to kind of drag her down the same path even though she has these abilities. And I did very much enjoy, I mean, as you mentioned, the kind of Hitchhiker's Guide-esque, like, why didn't you tell me that moment where just, like, Hina reveals that, like, if she basically gets told not to use her powers, but then it's revealed that there's a rather important side effect to her never using her powers, which again, like, appears at, like, the most inopportune time and then just kicks off a whole other round of stuff going on, which, you know, that was a moment early on that was kind of another moment that was just like, okay, yeah, I think I can see, you know, that I'm going to get on with this series in the long run.
Yeah, I think it helps that, like, it's going to sound weird, but I think it helps with, like, Nita being, like, a Yakuza and, like, a slightly, obviously, sort of extrapolated version of a Yakuza, but it really helps where, like, he gets into these really stupid, like, problems, and he's not, like, a complete irredeemable prick. Like, he's not exactly Kazuma Kiryu, but he gets in these situations where he's just like, oh man, like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. Like, this is... I need to get everyone to calm down and not be idiots for a second, but that's going to be hard. And quick note, my headphones have died. I need to put some headphones in because I can't hear anything you're saying, Andy. Sorry, one sec. So yeah, the one thing I'll say is that although I just ragged on the art for the faces and such, like, that's kind of the one weakness it has, which, you know, is probably the series' own fault for keep having close-ups of characters reacting to stuff, which, hey, it's a comedy manga, of course you're going to have that. But it has a lot of, like, good sort of moments when basically dumb stuff happens. Whenever stupid things happen or something explodes, it really sort of brings its A game in making it look as dumb as possible, like with the whole boating fishing trip thing where, you know, stuff is constantly going horribly wrong, and so the art kind of lets you know about that by drawing it, frankly. So it kind of works in that regard. It's just how the characters' heads are interfaced with their bodies is the one bit that makes it look kind of weird, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, it definitely has some moments where you kind of like cock your head sideways a bit. It's like, is that how humans look? I'm not sure I buy that. But yeah, like I think it does enough with its artwork. Like it never feels like it's being held back by it necessarily. I think is kind of the most important thing there. It's like, yeah, this is probably a series that could look better if it so wished, but it does everything that it needs to, and that's just fine with me.
Yeah, the comedy certainly works, and I was fearful when you started talking about, oh no, me not liking it, but no, as I say, like, the first few chapters are a weird sort of like grounding, but once the characters are familiar with each other and they're familiar to you, the reader, it really goes to the races. And I kind of enjoy the extended cast of, like, long-suffering idiots who get dragged into it, like Hina's school friend, who, you know, she just gets swept up for the ride in a, like, almost like Ford prefect kind of manner of like, oh, you're a bog for the ride, I guess. Well, shit, welcome to the madhouse. You're a sensible character, but now you're doomed.
Yeah. I mean, she serves that kind of like typical comedy thing of like being the normal person in a room full of idiots who's just like kind of too naive to realize that everybody's complete idiots and that she should know better than even to like hang out with them. It's like, oh yeah, sure, I'll just come out and like follow you with whatever you're doing. And then, yeah, like you say, before you know it, she's tending a bar, she's at a hostess club. Like, you know, it just kind of goes a bit off the rails, and you know, and then the great thing is like her mum phones and she's just like completely, it's like, oh no, I'm at a hostess club right now.
Yeah, I feel bad for her getting chewed out by her mum. It's like, look, gag manga shit happened to me, alright, mum? You know, I can't really help it, can I? Like, I'll be home soon.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like I think I definitely want to watch the anime adaptation of this. Like, having seen some clips of it, and like now I've got a feel for kind of, you know, how it pans out. Like, I definitely want to watch that, and yeah, I can see myself reading some more volumes of this as well. Kind of, I wish it was available a little more widely and thus on the cheaper end of the spectrum, because these volumes are kind of expensive in the grand scheme of things. Yeah,
they are kind of on the higher end, as you say. But, I get it. Like, One Piece books are a smaller publisher, but it makes it, you know, it's not so easy just to kind of fling money at it, sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Because like this definitely feels like a series that I'll happily like read some more of. But it also feels like the kind of series that's not the kind of like premium stuff like Saint Young Men that we mentioned earlier. That's like, oh yeah, sure, like I'll throw extra money at this just because of kind of the special thing that it is. This feels like something that I just kind of wish was available like as widely as possible across like all the platforms rather than just one or two. But hey.
Yeah, one thing I will admit actually that I should have mentioned with I Hear the Sunspot, but I can mention it now, is that both Hinamatsuri and I Hear the Sunspot have kind of non-standard font choices for character speech, which, whatever, you can do whatever you like with the fonts. Not everyone has to use Anime Ace, but it does lead to some strange font choices and like typography at some points. Oftentimes it feels like the actual font size for the speech bubbles is just a little bit too small. I'm reading on an 8-inch tablet and it gets kind of like, I've got 20/20 vision. But even I have to kind of like put it close to my face to read it. And some of the author's like notes or like the translation notes or side notes are in this like rather thin serifed font, which means that some of the detail kind of vanishes, due to the resolution. And so it can become quite difficult to read some of them. And in one case, in Hinamatsuri, there's like a section where they're looking at answers written on a chalkboard, and the answers are in black against a very dark grey background, again in a serif font, so it's hard to read. So it makes it kind of harder to kind of like read some of the smaller text. Also worth noting is I Hear the Sunspot comes in at a very svelte 45 meg, which, that's cool, but again, kind of makes it suffer on the resolution department. But again, you only really see that, at least I only really see all that with the fonts. And again, it's kind of one of these things where it's like zooming in on like rather too small font to try and read it. And some little sort of weird, like very minor, but Elliot moaned sort of typography and sort of like editing issues.
Yeah. I mean, I was reading on a 10-inch tablet, so I didn't really have any issues with legibility, but certainly like there's aesthetically, like their kind of font and typography choice just doesn't look as nice as kind of the typical standards. Like I don't want to sit here and say, oh, it looks like a scanlation, but it kind of does a little bit. Like it just feels that little bit less polished than kind of, what I'm used to from digital manga. I mean, I guess we should always also mention while we're talking about this, like, somebody on Twitter queried about I Hear the Sunspot and what its translation was like. It seemed pretty solid to me. I mean, again, don't have source material to compare to, etc., but like, there weren't really any points where I felt like, oh, this seems really clunky and doesn't make sense. Like, it all seemed to scan pretty well with both of these series for me. I didn't have any kind of readability issues in terms of how the translation felt personally.
Yeah, same. It seemed fine to me. I was kind of bracing for the worst if I Hear the Sunspot. I mean, there are one or two moments, but I think that's more just the fact that, oh no, I've forgotten his name. Damn it. The hearing loss guy. I forgot. Oh god.
Sugihara.
Sugihara. Jesus, that's a record for me forgetting someone's name even after I've said it 16 times. But there's one part where he's, I think the main problem just comes to the fact that he's bad at communicating, including, the one point when he should have been cut off, which is because he used ellipsis in a text message. Don't do that. It makes you read like, your mum. Like, it makes you look like you're 50 or something if you're using ellipsis in a text message. So, maybe it's just me just hating when people do that, but whatever. But yeah, I enjoyed Hinamatsuri a great deal. As you mentioned, it's the price on the higher end of digital books means that I can't really just fling money at it. That sounds very churlish of me, but I plan to read more of it, but it's not at the like impulse purchase level of, I can justify this, chuck. So I don't know if One Piece books ever appears in any sales. I haven't seen them so far, but I might just sort of hold back for a wee smidge. That's
exactly where I'm at with it. But yeah, like that aside, it's definitely, I feel like it's been a while since I've had so many kind of like laugh out loud chuckles at a series that I've read. Certainly for this podcast, because I know we perhaps don't pick enough comedy stuff, but like this was definitely like one of the funnier things that I've read in quite a while. Like once it warmed up and I warmed up to it was just like it was kind of knocking it out of the park with a quite surprising regularity.
Yeah, I think once it gets going, it's kind of unstoppable, which is a good fun thing to see. But yeah, have you got anything else to say about Hinamatsuri, Andy?
No, I don't think so.
Cool. No, I really enjoy it. It's got a lot of good stuff in there. Like reading it a second time was a great treat because, as I say, I had gotten used to some of its characters and its pacing, and I was like, oh man, this is all gold. Like, this is great. So that's Hinamatsuri. So moving on, what we can talk about next time. So we mentioned, Angie mentioned just now that we need to have more comedy, and so he has picked a comedy. Do you want to introduce your title for the next episode, Andy?
Yes, indeed. Like, if you are one of our Patreon subscribers, you'll know that recently we took on the first omnibus of Ranma Half, and we kind of talked a little bit about Rumiko Takahashi and her kind of influence, and it did kind of put into the back of my mind, it planted the seed that there's another really important series of theirs that I've not read, Urusei Yatsura, so I have picked volume 1 of that for the next show. As
a quick curse you, Andy, I was going to pick that, I swear to God, and also it's 400 pages. It's an omnibus, so, but I've already read it, so haha, sucks to be you. I'm ahead of you. So also from my pick, a romantic comedy series that spoilers for the episode, but I like a great deal and want to make Andy read it. It's We Never Learn, which is on the Shonen Jump app, and there's like God knows how much of it now. So I guess read until you get sick of it, or just I feel like you've read enough to have an opinion.
I feel like this is my punishment for taking your pick because I've seen the anime adaptation and read a little bit of this, and I have opinions on this series.
Well, I'll be glad to discuss them on the next episode of Screentone Club. But you can find out more about the podcast and previous episodes at screentone.club. Recently re-updated the list of topics we've previously covered. Turns out when you do like 32 episodes of a podcast with 2 topics apiece, you kind of cover a lot of manga fast. If you like the podcast, please consider telling a friend, tweeting about it, talking about it on the Discord. That sort of stuff really helps with gathering new adherents to the creed. And also you can contact us on Twitter at Screentone Club, or one word. You can also email us at show@screentone.club. And some personal plugs. My name's Elliot Page. You can find me at Elliot Page on Twitter, where I am currently in 6 different mind spaces at once because I'm about to have to move across the entire country and completely upheaval my life. But it shouldn't affect the podcast. So look forward to more episodes and me being a bit frazzled. Andy, how about you?
Yes, you can find me not doing any of those things at Hannah's 1979.
Okay, cool. So thank you everyone for listening, and good night.
Bye everyone.